Hello, everyone. We are back to our Meet the Filmmakers live chats on the Socially Relevant Film Festival YouTube channel. It's SRFF 2020, the Socially Relevant Film Festival's 7th annual edition, which we had to take this year online. And that was a decision we needed to make because we did not want to sacrifice the beautiful films from all these brave filmmakers who brought to us fruits of their labor of working on important issues for 2 years, 3 years sometimes of their lives, dealing with important social matters that are to be spoken about and discussed. Initially, we thought of waiting until September, but then we didn't know what could happen by then. Plus, delaying it longer meant interfering with our 2021 edition, for which we are already receiving submissions. So if you have a film for us, please submit it already on our submission platform, Film Freeway. So without further ado, I'm not going to introduce any moderators today because I am the moderator today on this session. But let me just tell you a couple of things about how this festival was brought about and why I started it 7 years ago. First of all, I had the idea of bringing you films that did not deal with violence. And when I say violence, I mean gratuitous, graphic violence, violence that becomes the core subject of a film, that talks about nothing but makes that glorifies violence. Well, if you don't feel like seeing such a film, you don't have to go to the movies to see it, or you don't have to tune into the channel that is showing that. Unfortunately, most of these films, and even films that have even less violence, revert to violent posters and violence when they are promoting the posters and the films. That is an invasion on our lives. It's very hard to avoid big posters on billboards, on bus stops, on buses, on everywhere, where you see guns and other forms of weapons and daggers and blood dripping from them, and chases and any and every scene of violence which invades our daily existence. So this is one of the reasons that got me going and all excited about this situation and saying that we need to present an alternative form of entertainment. Plus, a personal story happened to me where I had the misfortune of losing my very dear cousin and uncle, Vanya Ekserjan, whose name we have an award in, and it is dedicated to empowering women and girls across all categories in the festival. They were victims of a violent attack of a hate crime and lost their lives about 2004, 16 already years ago. And as the 10th anniversary of their death approached, I wanted to render homage to them and created the Socially Relevant Film Festival. I would like to welcome my guests today. We have two feature films, which we are discussing. One of them is a narrative feature, which is called Transference, a bipolar love story. And we have Raffaello Degruttola, from the director of that film. And we have Emilie Johannesen, or Johannesen, I don't know, how would you pronounce it? Yeah, from Norway. Raffaello is in London and Emilie is in Norway. And she is the actress, the star of Transference. We also have with us Stephanie King, who is the producer of Undermined. And it is a film that deals with the Australian, it's an Australian films, and it's called Undermined, Tales from the Kimberley, Undermined. And it's about the mining industry and how it is affecting the Aborigines and the people who live on the land. And the film is so multifaceted. So we're going to discuss all these beautiful films. And I also want to say something to the people who are watching us. Please feel free to put your questions in the comments section as you are watching. And I'm keeping my eye on that section here. That's why you see me doing this. I will take the questions and pop them up on the screen so that our guests can answer you for them. So again, this is the Socially Relevant Film Festival's 7th edition. And we are here with the directors of a narrative feature, Raffaello Degruttola, and the producer of the documentary feature, Undermined, Stephanie King. Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to see you. And I'm glad to say that because of this situation and us having to take the festival online, now I get to see everyone, even those people who were not going to be able to make it to New York for the festival. So let me just give you each a round and an opportunity to tell us how the idea of this film that you're making came to you, and how did you start working on it? Maybe we'll start with Raffaello.
Hello, I've lost, there you are. Firstly, thank you for having us. And also, I think I cancelled my flight because I was 2 days away from coming to New York for the festival back in whenever it was. And so here we are. But in terms of the film, I think it's something that's been playing on my mind for many years. The story, really, I wanted to tell a story of a love story that was fractured by secret mental health issues, and I think mental health issues that they were not even aware they were carrying, perhaps. So I left that open. And I really wanted to tell the story. It kept coming and going. I wrote a script and then I sort of formed it after I met Emilie. I really thought I could never make the film. And then I met Emilie and I knew I had to take that script out and adapt it accordingly, because when you have a moment like that and you find the right person, you've got to act on it. And that's what we did together.
So Stephanie, let's have the directors first, and then I'll come back to Emilie and have you say how you got involved.
Is that my turn?
Yes. I'll come back to Emilie.
So our film, our whole process started in 2014. It took about 4 years to make the film. It was quite a long process. I had been traveling in the Kimberley and working there, which is a very remote region of northwestern Australia, predominantly Indigenous lands. And I was working with one of the local organisations there. They're called CALAC, the Kimberley Aboriginal Law and Culture Centre. It's essentially a representative body for the key regional cultural bosses. And shortly after I left to go back to my home in Sydney, the Western Australian state government of the day announced the plan to close up to, I think it was around 200 Indigenous communities. However, these headlines were hardly reaching the east coast of Australia, where all the major cities are, and or the majority of major cities are. And initially there was very little news coverage. So that's when we started our investigative project into the land interests in the area and what the interests were in Indigenous land that might lead to people being forced off their traditional homelands. I met the director, Nicholas Rothel, and we started to develop this further. And then we brought on co-producers from Western Australia, who I should mention, Albert Wigan, who is a Bardi Gidja Nyulnyul man from up the Dampier Peninsula. He's sorry he can't join us. It's about 2 a.m. in that area right now. And also Mark Jones, who's based in Broome. And it was really key for us to have that collaboration with people who were based there to sort of guide the process through the 4 years of the filmmaking.
It's a long process, all these films. I was saying it in a previous session that it's just amazing how so many years of their lives these filmmakers are putting. So Emilie, we come to you and we want to see how you got involved and how did it happen that you ended up in this film?
I met Raf, the director and writer of this film. Quite randomly, I moved into the same building that he lived in. And when we found out that we were both in the same industry, we just sort of decided, or rather he asked if I wanted to get involved in just a small project that he was doing, a short film. And it sort of stemmed from there that we realized how much we enjoyed working together, and that we saw that we still had a little bit more of that story from the short film to take further on. And then Raf said, hang on, I have this old script that I've been dying to sort of take out again. And it just sort of spiraled from there, really.
It's quite interesting because the chemistry between the actors was very strongly felt. And that's part of the reason why this film was so successful, because you could see that there is so much real and organic interplay rather than, just two strangers who come together to do a film. And I think that was one of the strengths of the piece. So let me go to Stephanie and say that I so much enjoyed the film because it's, let me bring back Stephanie. This is going to be a little tricky because when I am not moderating, I am just doing that, but it's hard to juggle. Well, your film has so many facets. It's about Indigenous people's rights. It's about the right to the land. And of course, as we mentioned, there are so many parallels between the Australian Aborigines and the Native American populations who are from the land and who were there first, and suddenly they are considered as second-hand, second-rate or outsider or being discriminated against. Also, your film has a very powerful message about the environment and climate change, because how these mines are affecting, they're not only affecting the rights of the people who live on on lands, but they're also affecting the environment and climate, which is not only impacting that particular piece of land or only Australia, but globally, as we have learned from the lesson we are in the middle of right now with COVID-19, how everything is interrelated. Just as situations were coming under control in one part of the world, they are surging again from another part of the world, and it feels like it's going to go around in a circular way. Who knows until when? Also, your film has another piece of interesting point, and that's racial injustice and the exploitation of people of color. So maybe you want to tell us a little bit about the relationship between the Indigenous rights and the racial injustice, and then we'll come back to the environment and climate.
That's a very big question. I think to begin with, I think it's important to acknowledge as a white filmmaker my position of privilege, and I will speak from my perspective and not attempt to represent anyone else's perspective on these matters. Although I can speak to my experience working on this film in the Kimberley and to various people's messages in the film. I think in the film, for those who've seen the film, Albert Wiggin is one of the main sort of stars of the film, and he is an Indigenous ranger who is essentially looking after the land, working between traditional ecological knowledge, as they call it, or what he calls Indigenous science, because he rejects that sort of terminology of traditional knowledge. The intersection of that with Western science, and how those two different knowledge systems can come together to navigate challenges like mining and other development on the land, as well as a changing climate. So he's been a really incredible spokesperson for the value of Indigenous science in combating climate change. And as part of our impact campaign, we actually organised for Albert to give a TED talk, which you can find online if you'd like to hear more about his sort of advocacy for this approach to climate change, and what the world at large and non-Indigenous people have to learn from Indigenous people about, we're talking about a 60,000 plus year old culture that has managed to live through many changes in the climate and adapted and survived and thrived, in fact. And Albert makes a really incredible case for what the rest of the world has to learn.
Yeah, sorry, that is truly amazing. And it's very, very important, especially now that we are seeing that the technologies that we are going in the direction of, it's not necessarily the solution for us. Maybe it's a moment to take a step back and look at the ancient cultures.
Very much so. And at least in northwestern Australia, in the Kimberley, it's important to note that culture is actually continuing. So whilst it goes back 60,000 years, the songlines, the law has not been broken. Yes, it's been affected by colonisation and settler history in Australia in a really big way, in a way that can't be dismissed and shouldn't be looked away from. But many elements of that culture are still in existence today, and very rich and practiced, and things that I will never be privy to, but have utmost respect for, and we really should allow to take the lead in leading these discussions about how to adapt.
Yeah, very well made point, in the sense that whatever we do, we are always coming from a different perspective. When we talk about Black Lives Matter, when we talk about Indigenous people, Indigenous rights, and racial injustice, we of course advocate these movements. Of course, we understand that they're important, but at the end of the day, we are not the subjects of it. And it's important to acknowledge that whatever we do, in the end, we need to hear it from the actual people who are being subjected to these racial injustices. And just to open a small parenthesis, we have decided as a next, now that we saw that it's possible to take a festival online, our next one is going to be a retrospective on Black Lives Matter and the health, medicine and healthcare. Because, of course, these are the two most pressing issues right now that we all find ourselves in on a global level. When Black Lives Matter started to take shape and become even more outspoken right here in the United States, suddenly the echo of it was heard from London, from Paris, from all over the world. It didn't just contain itself to certain cities or states in the United States. So we have learned a big lesson in this health crisis, that we are all interrelated. We are all linked together, and it's the global culture that is affected by anything and everything that takes place, whether it's on the social level, whether it's on the medical level, health level, environmental level. We are all in this together. And this is an important point to stress. So we will be doing a retrospective on Black Lives Matter and bring back films from our previous 6 editions that we have shown already, about the Black experience, about racial injustice, and all these matters, that we have at least 20 plus films that we have already screened. And I contacted all the filmmakers, and I must thank them in public. Everyone was so generous in saying, yes, please go ahead, show our film. So all we have to do now is sit down and select, because we can't do all 25. It's a lot for us to handle, but soon we'll have that program. And who knows, maybe we should include your film. So we'll talk about that further. So let me get back to Raffaello and ask you a question about the research that took place in your film. Because yes, it's a narrative and it's not a documentary, but it is made so well that in a way we have a feeling that it was very well researched and it had such reality basis to it. And my question is, did you particularly decide to take these people into the medical and nursing profession by choice, or was that a conscious choice, or could they have been from other professions, or and so on? I would like you to comment on that.
On that particular point, it's because the story is very loosely based on my parents. There was, and the fact that both of our characters are, Emilie's character, Katarina, is a Norwegian nurse working in London, and I was the son of an Italian family born in London. So I wanted it to feel like the world of working immigrants. And the nursing profession seemed to sort of attract a lot of that. And also what I liked about it was that it was a professional setup. They were doing a professional job that was about caring for people, but yet they had their own issues inside as well. So whilst caring for others, they did care.
Yeah, and by the same token, I want to extend the same question to Emilie. You're not a nurse, obviously. You're an actress. So what kind of research did you do in order for you to play that character?
I suppose in that regard, I was quite lucky because I have worked in healthcare care before.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes. Not as a nurse, though, just as an assistant carer in my summers between university and on the side of acting. So I knew what it was like to be in a care environment and also working closely amongst people who, who were closer to death than what we are, hopefully. So I kind of knew like how you spoke to them and how you approached them and how sort of your day-to-day, what sort of things you'd be doing. So I did that, but we also did go to the hospice where we filmed and spoke quite a lot to the people who work there to gather a more authentic portrayal of their experience.
Yeah, it was very successful in that sense. So if people who haven't seen the film are wondering, please make sure you go on the website and you'll find more information about these films. You'll be able to see the trailers, and also you can go to the tickets, and the tickets are only $6, people. We've specially made it as low as that. If we had done it in the cinema, it would have been $15, but we decided to keep the price low because there is so much competition online with all this free content that's being offered. Unfortunately, we are a small festival. We're not subsidized in a big way, and we cannot afford to make it free. And also we thought, we should put a price on it, and people had already purchased tickets in early bird tickets from way back in March, which we are completely honoring. So that's why it is only $6. And for the short film selections, it's only $4. So come on, it's the price of a latte nowadays. So go ahead and check them out. I'm having some comments here, which I think is a good moment to bring them on. So I'm just going to pop them on the screen and we'll look at them together. So here's a comment from Helen about Transference, and she says, wonderful film, triggering for those who have had relationships with individuals with bipolar disorders. Very compelling and cathartic. Well done. So it's a very nice compliment, which I happen to agree with. Therefore, that's why the film is here. So we have a question for Stephanie from Bill Bossert, and it says, what are the challenges you found in getting your film recognized? So many things going on in the world.
Just unmute. It is a kind of unprecedented time around the world at the moment, and obviously everyone's been very focused on the impact of COVID-19, rightly so, and more recently Black Lives Matter campaigns and protests and developments with cases around police brutality, which is rightly the focus. With Undermined, we premiered in late 2018 in Australia. So we actually had a quite thorough, we had a release in cinemas around the country in early 2019. We started our Australian festivals in 2018, and we did the international circuit after our Australian release. So we were just beginning before COVID-19 hit. So we had I suppose, a sort of reversed model to the common model of going out internationally and then sort of doing a domestic release. So we were able to have, that proper impact before COVID-19 hit. We have been, I suppose, like everyone else, just trying to stop, take time, react, do what we need to do personally and professionally, and look after each other. And now to sort of pivot to online events, which are obviously growing around the world. We have different situation in Australia where the restrictions have been to a greater extent lifted with lower rates of COVID-19. So we'll be starting to try some more live screenings, in real life screenings, but also have had a lot of learnings about, I suppose, the online model and how successful that can be and how that can increase your access for people in other areas. Although it should be noted that not everyone has great internet access, and that is a disparity that especially exists in remote Australia. So that's something we're very mindful of with our collaborators. For example, where Albert lives in Beagle Bay community, sometimes it's fine, sometimes it can be difficult. So these are challenges that we're facing and trying to sort of learn and adapt in real time like everyone else.
Yeah, these are true and real, tangible challenges. One of the films we are screening is called Can't Stop the Sun from Shining, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow. And this documentary is about 4 centenarian women. It's a very uplifting story. If you haven't had a chance to see it, because it shows that, your desire to live and do something with your life has nothing to do with how old you are and what age you are in. However, now that we are online, it is posing serious problems or challenges, let's say, to the people who want to see it, because it's online, it's with a link, and of course, when you're dealing with centenarian people, there are a lot of their friends and family who are in that age group, which are not necessarily on a daily basis. Maybe now, after this crisis, everybody is going to become computer savvy, whether we like it or not. But it's very much akin to having it in the cinema. If we had the film festival in the cinema, not everyone was going to have the mobility or the ability to actually get up and come to the cinema. So there's always going to be a situation where some people are left behind, and we should do everything so that no one is left behind. We have to create easier to a more user-friendly ways with the technology and so on and so forth. So I'm seeing here a bunch of other questions. Let me pop another one. One for Raffaello. It says, how has your social understanding of bipolar mental health changed during and after the completion of this film?
I think what I've learned about it is although there are symptoms that everyone with bipolar might have, it does feel like the personality and the background culture of that person is a major factor in how they behave when bipolar hits. And we know that there's two types, one that is much more severe than the other. And this particular case, it wasn't the severe one, but it did affect him to the point he was in denial that he would ever have it again. And the moment he thought he found something that he was just made him happy, his whole world collapses. And I think we know by psychotherapists sort of looking at the film, there is a reason when two people meet that something clicks. And that is something in our subconscious that connects because there is something in the other person that we haven't overcome yet, and it connects us. Until we overcome it, then we can't move on to something else more positive. We always sort of attract ourselves to that particular, whether it, in this case, was a destructive relationship because of our past. So anyway, I didn't want to make it just about his character. Slowly we unravel she has issues as well, and so the complexities of both cases, both histories, become a concoction, a minor explosion that they don't understand.
It's very interesting because a lot of times people like that who both have issues is part of the reason why they are attracted to each other in the first place. And instead of helping with the situation, in the long run, it gets to become even more complicated. When somebody's watching it from outside and you have the possibility of taking a step back and looking at it, or if you're a qualified professional in the field, you can see how the relationship is heading towards disaster. But there is no way you can wave the red flag or tell these people, because the worst situation with any type of mental illness, yesterday, for example, we were talking about teenage suicide, and that's also another mental illness, and it has to do with depression and so on and so forth. The worst part about it is that there is nothing you can do. Sometimes you're standing there helplessly watching the situation. You can see the disaster towards which it is heading, but you cannot pull the person and shake them by the shoulders or say something because they are in total denial. You wanted to say something?
I think it's an important point, if you don't mind, because my father was quite severely had bipolar. One thing I learned as a young adult, a young teenager, was I learned to have compassion because I went in search of answers, and I quickly learned that wasn't really him when he was in that state. And so it taught me to have compassion rather than judge him in the state he was at that time, which was not a very attractive state to be around, but somebody had to step up and help. And so if that person, even if it's teenage suicide, teenagers are troubled and they'll be at school and they'll be, hidden and closed, and a lot of people won't want to hang out with them because of that. Actually, what we need is the reverse, is compassion, understanding that something's going on behind the scenes that we're not completely aware of. So the more compassion we have as a society, and whether that's with, Black Lives Matter and Aborigines, and the closer we will become to, I think, a better way of living together.
I think you pointed to a very important thing, the opening up and allowing the outside compassion to come in. Because in most situations with mental health, it stays within the family and it becomes a shameful thing. Nobody wants to talk about, nobody wants to admit it, and the family tries to deal with it internally. So what happens is that if we're dealing with the bipolar situation of a spouse, usually the husband or the wife, whoever is not the bipolar person, ends up taking all the burden on themselves because of not wanting to open up, not wanting to include other people with other compassions. and trying to either deny or pretend nothing is happening, or try to solve the problem themselves with the means that they have, which are not enough. And usually it's that person who ends up breaking in the process.
Very true.
So it's very, very problematic. The most problematic part is the denial, because there is a treatment. It's possible to treat all sorts of mental illnesses. And of course, I'm not a big advocate of medication and putting chemicals into your body, but sometimes it is important, and that might be the only way. Because if a person has to be able to function properly in society, if that's the only way, or maybe other holistic means, through food,
actually,
yeah.
In the same way you spoke about the internet isn't accessible to everybody in Australia, for example, then that means that the right treatment might not be accessible to everybody as well, based on their background, where they are, many factors. So I don't think there's a blanket one response to a situation either.
Yeah. Absolutely not. The most important first step in all of these films, and that's basically where the Socially Relevant Film Festival's mission comes in, whether we're talking about Black Lives Matter, Indigenous populations, or mental health, or other social issues, women, violence against women, you name it. We cover all these matters. The most important thing we can do ourselves as a festival is shine the spotlight on these social issues and bring them to the forefront so that people are aware that such things exist and a conversation is opened. That's the first biggest step one can take. And just as, you know, when you have a headache or you have a stomach ache or you have even fever or whatever, you go to the doctor and you take a medication, or you take antibiotics if it's an infection or whatever it is. I mean, there should be no stigma attached to mental health. If we are able to remove that stigma and make it that people who are suffering from mental health are able to get help and be treated, that already is the first major step. So let me take a couple of other questions. I have one here. Oh, it's another question for you, Raffaello. It says, was it your intention to cast the nurses and healthcare workers as European immigrants in view of Brexit?
Indirectly, yes. Because my experience was mainly always dealing with immigrant workers in the healthcare industry, and I just thought it were also the Norwegian influence was really interesting to me, because that one that I'd never come across, and I really thought that was good, because, you know, on viewing you'd think she might be British in the whole conventional sense, but Norwegians coming over and everybody was going to be excluded from helping. Coming here to help and work. And I know my parents came here with £14 in their pocket and made it work. You know, after 45 years, I think my mum was still having difficulty getting a passport. And you know, so there's complexities, and my compassion fell with the immigrants, definitely, having been brought up in an immigrant house.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you chose to go that way, because you could have set up the entire bipolar story in a totally British setting with two totally British people, but it wouldn't have had that many layers and roundness to it. Although it's important to see that at some points we could have diverged. Is this situation being produced because they're immigrants, or is this situation being produced because they are mentally suffering, or is it because one has to do with the other, or are all immigrants mentally?
Not that. The rest of them are definitely variables. They're definitely variables. And I saw the world as, from my point of view, which was I was white but not quite, and so this is my world.
Right. So I want to take throw another question on the screen, but before I do that, I want to tell Stephanie that another interesting thing about Undermined were the stunning images. Visually, the film was so stunning and so compelling because you're talking about such a issue that also has its legal and political repercussions, and it could have been very preachy and boring and going into details and legalities and laws and politics and stuff like that, but instead the film offers us a stunning visual panorama which we are captivated with. And whoever hasn't seen it, please go see it, because you're really going to get something out of it. Yes, Raffaello?
No, I'm going to.
Yeah, please do. So let me have a question here. What is happening with possible claims, payouts for reparations for spiritual damage? Noongar people and others. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Michael has, I can see, made a couple of entries about various reparations cases, one for the spiritual damage for Noongar people, but also for stolen generation compensation. I haven't been directly involved with, I haven't been working with Noongar people. So in Western Australia, they are much further south than the area that our film is set in, which is the Kimberley region, which is northwestern. So culturally very different, although there are obviously a lot of cases that are resonating around the country of Australia, but it's worth noting that there are over 200 countries or nations in Australia. So there's a huge diversity in the situation between those different nations, although there are parallels. Also just the influence of the European settlers has been different in different areas based on the rate at which people moved across the continent, the different policies in the area, the different settlers in the area, and their the way that they worked with or against Aboriginal people or executed different modes of genocide, of which stolen generations was one method. For those who are not familiar with Australia's history, there has been until I think the 70s or 80s, there was a practice of removing children from their parents and putting them into missions, and that actually, whilst the stolen generations policy has been discontinued, it still continues today, in the sense that children are removed from their parents under child protection laws. So that's a really massive issue that we face. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really speak to how these cases are progressing, but as an Australian citizen and...
Right. There is another question for Raffaello.
Oh, sorry, they were right in the middle of an answer there. I was totally
trouble with... Yeah, something happened with the images, and I felt, Stephanie?
Did we get cut off?
No, we didn't, but something happened with the images something to themselves. So technology, we can't predict it. Anyway, did you, I didn't hear the rest.
Oh, we've lost Nora.
I'm sure she'll come back. I thought
maybe answer your...
I'm here.
Yeah.
Don't worry. We just got out and in for a second. I think the StreamYard is having problems. StreamYard, if you're hearing me, I think you guys need to fix your operation, because yesterday we had the same troubles. So I have a couple of words to tell you. StreamYard, and this is the paid StreamYard, so it's not the free one. So whoever is listening, please take note. So I have a question here for Raffaello. Sorry, Stephanie, had you finished answering the previous question?
That's all right.
No, you can continue. I don't want to cut you off.
No, that I was just I was saying essentially I don't have a legal perspective on the cases, but I think they're all landmark cases for claims for compensation right now that are really, really important to make reparations and acknowledge Australia's history and the effect of European settlement. And I think that all Australians and you know, in fact, the world, but particularly Australian citizens, do have a duty to support those cases.
So the question to Raffaello is, can you speak of the guerrilla filmmaking style you employed?
Can I ask Emilie to maybe give her perspective on that? I feel like I've hijacked.
Please do,
maybe
yes.
You learned something from the way we had an idea and ran around the streets of London, trying not to get caught on the ground.
I've done that in my time on a feature film when it's called Beg, Borrow and Steal.
We certainly do that. Emilie.
Yes, I think I don't know if I can talk much about style and if we did anything in specific. I just feel like we did however much we could get away with, be it filming places we might not have a permit to film and just hope we didn't get caught because we couldn't really afford to pay anything, but also favors from everyone who knew, respected and loved Raf, because he had built himself an extensive network over the years that he'd been in London, and he had a lot of friends who respected his work and who were eager to work with him. So they work for either less money or completely free, and we are so grateful for that. And it was also just a case of, when are you free? When is our cameraman free? Can we just get out and do it? Be it 9 in the evening or 7 in the morning, you know? Just get out there and do it.
Very interesting. I have a question that's also directed to you. So let me pop that up on the screen. It's Kellen who's saying, how did you prepare for portraying someone in a relationship with a person with bipolar disorder? Did you draw upon personal experience or speak to people who have dealt with that dynamic?
First of all, thank you for a very interesting question, Kellen. I appreciate it. Well, the story, as we mentioned, is based partly on a true story on Raf's parents. So I did know some bits of the dynamic of how their relationship was and how the other would react to the other person if a situation would happen. So I knew some of it from before, but I do also have people in my life who have suffered from bipolar, and know and love them very, very much. So I did have like a smidge of an idea of what it was like to love someone who had that as their reality, daily reality. So for me, it wasn't very difficult at all. But it did take some conversations. But in the end of the day, love is love, you know. Sometimes it's a mental health issue that brings your relationship down, and sometimes it's just going different paths in life. But overall, I think the focus was more on finding just the love story in between them, instead of wondering how my character would deal with the mental health issues, because overall, I don't know if that was really what broke them in the end. I don't know. It's a difficult one, but you know, yeah.
There's one more question for you. It looks like all your friends are asking this question. Let me see. Nicholas Antoniadis. Question to Emilie. What sense did you make of the character's gradual destabilizing of her mental state in connection with that of Nick's?
Good. Gradual and connect. Oh God, it's very windy over here. It's hard. It's difficult to answer because I'm not completely sure what he's asking. If it's just the connection in between them and how both of them,
or maybe how it affected you personally as an actor.
Well, the days definitely. Well, we shot sometimes out of order. So although we tried to shoot in order as much as we could, but when we shot in order, it was interesting to come on set one day where we'd be quite happy, and then the relationship would have shifted. So we'd come to set and leave set with quite different energies. So it was definitely a journey to go on. But me and Raf have spoken about this many times, how this journey was something that we appreciated so much because it pushed us to the breaking point where we're like, we're going to fully immerse ourselves in this world. And that means going home at the end of the day feeling like crap if you've had a tough scene that day. And it also means going home very happy if you've had a good scene that day. But it definitely did affect us and how we communicated after and before a scene.
And do you mind if I just jump in for
Sure,
one moment?
Of course.
I think that's where transference came from, which was that she was unaware of how she'd seen things in her past, which makes you subconsciously react in a certain way in your present future if you're not aware about what's been transferred onto you. And we all have elements of that in our life, and that's what happened. He had transference, and so did she, and the concoction of their destructive transferences was their story.
Yeah. So I think we have to wrap, unfortunately. Thank you, everyone, so much for being with us. Thank you to the viewers who have asked such compelling and wonderful questions. You made my job easy as a moderator, because instead of my questions, all these wonderful questions were asked from the audience, and the wonderful panelists responded in a beautiful way. And I want to leave you all with one thought. I meant to ask, what are your plans in this post-COVID situation that we are all finding ourselves in, and how do you see your work being affected by it? But unfortunately, we won't have time to go into elaborating that. But of course, it's going to affect the work of all of us, whether it's in the narrative, fiction, acting, or documentaries. I was just today thinking, I love South Africa, and I've always wanted to be there. The previous talk was about a South African short, and I said, oh, maybe that piece on apartheid that I'd always wanted to do. And I'm going like, this isn't a time to travel, it's like, where am I going? I can't go anywhere, So it's really, really going to affect the way we all think and work and continue to function. So thank you all very much. I want to take this opportunity and thank all our filmmakers. And I keep saying, without filmmakers, we don't have a film festival. And our sponsors, without sponsors, we don't have a film festival either. And our team and everybody and the jury. Over 25 jury members who come together. They don't come together physically, but they put their time to select the winners, which are going to be announced tomorrow at 4 o'clock via Zoom Live. The link is on the website. And please join us. It's going to be a virtual award ceremony and a virtual party and networking for everyone. And here is what you win if you enter to win our contest. It's Indie Pix, our industry partner, who is offering us DVDs. Okay, thank you, everyone. It's hard to say goodbye to such wonderful people, such talented director, producer, actor, that have brought us these beautiful films. Please carry on what you're doing. The world needs to hear these stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nora.
Bye.
Bye.